All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Facilitating XYZ Live. I am Sam Killerman. I'm one of the co-creators of the Safe Zone project, co-authors of the Unlocking the Magic book about facilitation, and also a guide to facilitation. Both of those books are coming soon. And the co-creator of the Hopeful Facilitating XYZ, a resource for all facilitators that Meg Bolger and I are currently working on. And I'm going to have Meg introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. I am the Meg Bolger, the other half of all of those projects that Sam just listed. I'm a social justice educator and entrepreneur, and I am really excited to introduce Chad Littlefield, who is going to do a better job of introducing himself than I could.
Heyo, I'm Chad Littlefield. Really pumped to chat with Meg and Sam today. Met them through, the world happens through relationships, and so met Meg through somebody got connected, and two really wonderful people that are doing wonderful things in the world. So I'm really pumped to share a little bit of my world. I co-founded a company called We, like the word, W-E, like a group of people. And I go into organizations and usually first listen to their people-related problems and their needs and work with them to break down communication barriers and increase the levels of connection and interaction and engagement that happens at work, because there's a way that when you show up to work and you know and like and trust the people that you work with, you could be washing cars or moving numbers around, and work is just a little bit better. And research would say a lot bit better, but yeah. That's a scoop. So I'm pumped to answer questions and ask questions. Hit me.
All right. Thanks, Chad. Well, you gave us a little overview there of kind of what you do. How did you get started in facilitation?
Yeah. People, the same way in some ways that we're having this. So going way back, I went into college knowing that I was going to be a doctor for sure. I was so excited about it. I was like going pre-med, going to go med school, and then I took chemistry class, and it was like, everything went down the drain, and so it totally shifted. Like, had this crisis moment, crying on my dorm room bed, figuring out, oh my gosh, what I'm going to do with my life, and found this whole world of human services and psychology, and it seemed like it really connected. And so in traveling down that path, was just really passionate about what I still am passionate about, which is creating connections between people that otherwise would not happen. And so sometimes that's between ideas that are in their head, and sometimes that's literally understanding each other a little bit better, a little bit differently. So I did a lot of that through student orgs in undergrad, and there was this one beautiful moment where I was walking into the Vice President of Student Affairs office at Penn State, and I was walking into the office for a meeting with them, and out of the office, these two wonderful people, Sam and Lori, walked out, and they're the co-directors of this really cool organization that I worked with for 5 years called World in Conversation. And basically, over the course of 5 years, I spent 500 times in a dialogue for 90 minutes with a group of strangers in a circle about 8 to 10 people, talking about stuff you're not supposed to talk about, like race and gender and culture and conflict. And some of those dialogues were face-to-face, and some of them were with folks in really peaceful nations like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Gaza, Iran, Iraq, China. And so just learned so much through that world. And then I met another guy named Rod Lee, who is super awesome, brilliant mentor, does a lot of experiential training and development related to communication skills and employee engagement strategies with little companies like Walmart and Pepsi and BP and such. And so I learned a ton from him because he's amazing. So I took the two worlds and decided to learn how to be an entrepreneur and take a leap and try it out full-time independently. So I think that's a pretty encapsulating answer, Meg.
Yeah. What what is something about facilitation that, like, so what's interesting about all of that, and when we've been doing this so far, when we've been hearing people give their introductions and tell us who they are, the thing that I keep hearing in a lot of people's stories are concepts that are helpful in facilitation themselves. So this is like a very pointed question that you probably weren't ready for, but what would be an aspect of facilitation or your style of facilitation that allowed you to make all of those transitions? Because I don't know many people who could so cavalierly describe what I could easily describe as like a whirlwind few years of life in a way that you made it just sound like it makes sense.
Oh, I didn't talk about all the days that I had no idea what I was doing and I was wandering the world aimlessly. Relevant too.
Those are good too.
No, so an aspect or a kind of a tool from facilitation that helped me navigate that, probably one that my now business partner, Will Wise, taught to me long ago, which is how to ask really wonderful questions. And so there's a way, like I just moved to Asheville, North Carolina, and settling in here, there's a way that I want to really live and breathe the philosophy of seek to understand before seeking to be understood. And so I'm in this place, I've been here for 2 months, I'm interested in this place of learning. And so what's helping smooth the transition is in the last 2 months, I've got 30 cups of coffee with people. I'm not actually drinking the coffee. Sometimes it's tea. Most of the time it's water because I would be dehydrated if I did. But and I sit down and I ask a lot of questions just to learn from their experience with this mindset that I've been big on this Bill Nye the Science Guy quote that everybody you will ever meet knows something that you don't. And so really, if you're taking on that mindset from a place of facilitation, paired with the tool of asking really good questions that oftentimes are open and start with how or what, creates some really fun conversations with people, and has over the last couple months and the last couple years. So
yeah. That's interesting. So from what I know about about like being able to connect people to people, that seems to be like a skill set that you have a particular affinity for. And I guess along that line of what are some like of asking good questions, I'm interested to know, do you have like favorite introductory questions or things that you think are really helpful for getting to know people that you ask and that you find other people don't?
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot more. So one of the
you're like, I do so many things that other people don't do that are amazing.
So yeah, a little bit. Like I don't know if you guys saw, but like a couple of years ago or last year, we designed this deck of cards. So there's 60 questions in here. They're in there because they're all really good questions. So they're pulled from 20 or so facilitators and experts that have made their life of asking questions and learning from people. And so there's lots of them that are good. The best answer, I think, is probably it depends. It's always the best answer.
Yeah.
So it depends on the context. The two that came to my mind real quick, though, one is that Will and I have been using a lot. We have done a couple corporate programs recently, and I started off each one just by asking, what are you intending to achieve at work, and what about that is important? And so it's a little like this idea of connection before content. So it's a little connection before content that we do right very close to the start of a day or the start of a training or workshop, and it allows us to ping back to it throughout the day. So if we're doing later on, we're doing an experiential activity where people are up out of their seats and the group is solving some sort of problem that doesn't really matter, but it's more the dynamics that are coming out in that problem. Sometimes the answers to those questions are really useful because oftentimes, at least the trend that I've seen, is that answers to what are you intending to achieve at work and what about that is important tends to have these like big picture answers that are outside of themselves. And so it's not like nobody's saying like, I want to get this report done by Friday. They're saying like, I want to build a better work environment, or I want to serve our customers better, or something that's like more bigger and a little bit more beautiful in some ways. And so tying into that is cool. And then the second one isn't as much of a question, but a prompt with the group, getting their wheels turning and actually encouraging people to look at, like, pair up with somebody, look at somebody else, and ask them a question you feel naturally curious about. And so it's their own question, but it's rooted in their own curiosity. And there's a way that if somebody truly asks a question that's rooted in their own curiosity, so much more interesting than if you ask, how are you? How was the game yesterday? Like all the questions that everybody already knows the answer to, because either they thought about it or they answered it 5 times earlier in the week.
Right.
So.
And when you say that people already know the answer to, it's the person being asked the question. They can just like pull that from the memory. Is that what you mean? Not the person asking?
Both, I think. So if I ask you,
okay.
in a lot of contexts, if I ask, how are you? I know your answer is good, bad, or fine. Probably good or fine.
Yeah.
Right.
Or not even an answer. You just say, how are you right back. And so it's like not even a question. It's more of a reading. It's culturally what it's become.
Yeah.
And the person being asked that question already also knows one of those 3 answers.
Yeah. It's the reason why I asked that is I think of that as like co-creative questions in a way. Like you're asking a question that you're not really sure you know the answer to, and you're not sure if the person responding will know the answer. And what's neat is that whatever comes out is a surprise sometimes for both of you. And I think that combined with the genuine curiosity creates some really awesome moments. The reason why I asked you that was because I find that in facilitation, especially if you've done many facilitations along the same lines, it's hard to maintain that genuine curiosity. I was wondering if you've ever struggled with that, and if so, how you've worked your way through that, and if you haven't struggled with it, like how do you maintain that genuine curiosity when you're in front of a room?
Sam, what do you ask good questions or something? Yeah, so this is an awesome question, and it's like lesson 1 of the workshops that we'll do with sometimes universities, sometimes organizations. So in terms of finding your own curiosity, I carry this belief, and it's totally not a proven fact right now. This is like traveling into just like Chad's little philosophy world right now, which is I think that curiosity is a choice. And you can turn it on and you can turn it off. And so if there's a way that you can walk down the exact same street on 2 different days, and on one day notice nothing, and on another day notice everything. Maybe not everything, but 100 things that you didn't see just the day before. Same walk, same place, same everything, nothing changed, yet you're noticing. And so part of that curiosity is first like turning on the noticing. Maybe I'm refining my unproven philosophy right now. No, in some ways, I wonder if noticing is the first choice, and then you can turn that into curiosity. So one of the concrete tools that Will and I will give to folks that I picked up in the world of world and conversation is find something on a person, physically what they're wearing, or in the environment. Find something that they're wearing, sharing with their mouth, so something that they've said or are saying, and maybe you've overheard it, or maybe you've had a little bit of a conversation already started, or maybe you've known them for 30 years and they say something that's like, whoa, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean about that? And pursuing that. So wearing, sharing, carrying, and presenting. So if they're so sometimes you see somebody at a bus stop and they're like hung over, head hanging low, or they're like can't stop moving because they're so excited about something. There's a way that like if you see somebody that's like this, there's a way that is a window into asking like, hey, it looks like your day is going really cool. I'm curious what happened that is making you bounce right now.
I like that.
Yeah.
Wearing, sharing, carrying. or presenting. It kind of it loses its awesome rhymeness at the end. I'm trying to think of a presenting word that would rhyme with that.
I'm wondering if we share them in different order too. But yeah, presenting, wearing, carrying, and sharing.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So what's something that you think you're still learning as a facilitator? Like, it sounds like you are constantly, and you were just saying like you're continuing to evolve your thought on the curiosity being a learned thing. I'm wondering, like, what's something that you think that you're still learning, or that you feel like you learned recently as a facilitator?
Yeah. Let me share a failure that happened yesterday.
People love those. So by all means, share as many failures.
So I am still learning how to explain facilitation the right way to the right person. Because there are some people that you say facilitation and they've got it. And there are other people that are like, what do you mean? And so yesterday I've been going to this entrepreneurs meetup, 1 Million Cups of Coffee in Asheville. And I was there yesterday, and I've like played with a lot of different ways of concisely sharing what I do in a way that, like, for people that don't care and probably want the 10-second intro, and for people that might want more. And so what I've been on lately is starting with the problem. So like, we go into organizations that have communication barriers, and we work to break them down. And then if they're curious about how we do that, then we can talk about that. But the why, really, is that there is something between you and me, besides a screen. There's something between you and me that prevents us from totally sharing what we're struggling with, or our most vulnerable moments, or what's really ticking us off, or whatever, like some barrier there. And when you can create that transparent flow back and forth. So the failure was I talked with somebody, and this is after like hundreds of times explaining what I do. And this guy asked me what I did, and I just like picked up some like nonverbals that he like really didn't care. And so I just said like, oh, like I'm a facilitator, and I go into organizations. And he just cut me off, and he was like, yeah, so you're a facilitator in organizations. Still have no idea what you mean. Or what you do, rather.
Are you an assassin? What do you do?
It was a little bit of sass thrown in there, so maybe it wasn't fully failure. I can probably dish out some of that blame. I don't know. But so as a facilitator, still learning that.
Curiosity.
Say that again?
Scare quotes don't inspire a lot of curiosity.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's for sure. There is one. In terms, my favorite definition that I've found for facilitation was on when you right-click, when you're typing something on Microsoft Word, which I never use anymore because Google Docs just works fine for me. But when you right-click on a word and it gives you synonyms, typed facilitation, and I right-clicked, and it said to smooth the process of. So there's a way that facilitation means lots of things. And so from my deepest understanding of Sam and Meg, your world, is that facilitation has a strong link with social justice issues. And so more aligned with maybe my work at World in Conversation, where we're having dialogues about really sticky stuff that people don't usually talk about with strangers, like race and gender and culture and conflict. And yet for somebody else like Rod, facilitation might be hopping on a virtual training session with the top 5 executives in Walmart's marketing department and giving them a virtual training where they can ask questions back and forth. And so those are really different things, but both fall under the process of smoothing, fall under the definition, rather, of smoothing the process of.
No, it's interesting. I think ever since Meg and I started writing these books about facilitation, we've had this conversation a lot. And actually earlier, just today, we were talking about different definitions of facilitation. Meg, what was the one you said that you saw on like Google?
Yeah, so facilitation is, well, a facilitator defined by Google is one who facilitates. Facilitation is like a activity done by a facilitator. And I was like, thanks, Google. That was so insightful. And And I'm sure that their definition of facilitate is like the engagement of facilitation or something like incredibly vague as well.
And it's tough because facilitation, it does mean so many different things to different people. We do, like, Meg and I are both social justice facilitators, but something that we've talked about a lot too, and something that I find interesting, is that you can do that. We think facilitation is a very socially just way of conveying information, or a socially just way of helping people learn information, but you don't necessarily have to do it in a way that's socially just. Like, some people can use facilitation for means or to ends that are not socially just, and you can also facilitate a social justice conversation in a way that isn't socially just. So I don't know, there's not, I guess I'm with you on there isn't a one definition, and I wouldn't even say that Meg and I, who are literally writing a book about it, could even as succinctly define it as I'd like. So we're still working on it too.
Let me kick a question back your way, and I'm going to go with Meg or Sam, actually, for this one. So, let's start with Sam. So I'm wondering, from the book, what might help draw this out? From the books that you've written and the content that you produce, what do you feel like is one of the most practical, useful things in that book that somebody can take, anybody, a not facilitator, could take on as a part and have this little nugget of facilitation that is useful to them in whatever world they live in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would just say that the chapter I just finished today I'll go with, because it's fresh in my mind, and it would be this concept that "and" is more powerful in a conversational setting than "but." So if someone, yeah, you agree? Yeah, I've already noticed your enunciation of "and," I was like, oh, you're an "and" versus "butter." Like, I can tell when people are that way. But anybody who, like, if that wasn't a thing, the way I'd really easily describe that is, like, when someone presents the reality to you, if you disagree with it, you can shut them down by saying, but I feel this way, or you can basically allow them to have the reality and then also present yours by just saying, and I feel this way, and energetically the difference is huge. And I think that in facilitation, that's a massive difference, and it's also a massive difference in just conversations with people. I think anybody who's in an intimate relationship with someone, whether it's romantic or business or just a friend, that rule of recognizing the power of "and" versus the power of "but" is just a huge one. Yeah,
it doesn't matter if you're giving feedback to your significant other or if you're brainstorming a $5 million marketing strategy. Using the word "but" has this way of just like closing down possibility.
Yep.
Yeah. Then I don't know what your background or connection to "and" versus "but" is, but one of the strings attached for me is improv and the idea of yes and. And so there's like an actual activity called yes and, where people line up in a row, somebody says something, somebody else gets in the line and says yes and then they build on it. And then somebody else hops into the scene and yes and they build on that, and they just co-create this story together with two words, yes and, over and over again.
Yeah, and we have a chapter about that as well. So yeah, nice. We have a chapter about yes and. For me, that's huge. But it's tough to define facilitation. So I just wanted to. I think it's interesting because all these conversations we've been having have been really fun, and this is the first time we've really brought up in these conversations now, a few hours of these conversations, that the concept we're discussing isn't even that universally understood or easy to nail down if you try to understand it. And I think that's okay. I don't think that's a problem necessarily. It's just something that I find interesting.
I think one thought on that, after we chat here, I'm going to hop on a dual coaching call with this brilliant person named Alexis, who works for an organization called 3 Day Startup in Austin, Texas, and we're splitting an hour coaching call, and I'm coaching her on like facilitation techniques and ways to make her work a little bit more experiential in nature. So instead of delivering content in a sit and get format, how can you give people an actual experience that they get to feel that content as opposed to just hear it? And then she is, and this is where the relevant part comes into defining facilitation, she is coaching me around, just has this amazing mind around creating and crafting really clear, accessible language to describe why you do what you do and what you do to other people that probably don't care nearly as much as you do. Surely don't care nearly as much as you do. And one of the things in an email, she sent out this, like, Chad, what if you tried out this elevator pitch? From all that I know of what you do, what if you tried out just saying, like, I help companies break down communication barriers and replace those barriers with connection and engagement. And I love doing it, but that's enough about me. Tell me a little bit more about your work. And so that's like a little bit stiff and stale in this moment, but it's using that asking powerful questions. So if you're really a facilitator and you want to describe what you do, I think the best way, and even if you just have a job that's weird that you have trouble describing to people that aren't in that field, I think asking questions first, seeking to understand before seeking to be understood, is helpful. Because there's a way when that person replied to me and said, oh, I designed an app and I have 10 developers and this is what we do and this is where I want to go with it, I can then describe facilitation in the concept of what I might do with 10 developers to get them to communicate more effectively so that their app is better, so that they serve their users better. Whereas before, I might give a totally irrelevant example about working with a transportation company or something like that. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think of facilitation as a style of engagement that, like, there is, or like one way that you can engage people. And it's interesting, so much in this conversation, we've kind of gone into this like meta level of like, how do you use facilitation to talk about facilitation? But I think that kind of like harkens back to that very working definition, because as Sam said, like, I was working on defining that term right before this call, was like, it's a style of engagement. And we do an activity that holds it up as like, what's the difference between facilitating, teaching, and lecturing? And so like and that's a specific context to put facilitation between, right? Like you could hold facilitation up next to other things and compare it very differently. But I think when you compare it as like a way of communicating information, like I think of facilitation as a style of engagement that allows everybody to feel that they have a right to contribute to the knowledge in the room. Whereas like what you said around like what was it? The sit and give, or I didn't.
Sit and get mentality.
Yeah.
So we're a group of people sit while somebody is on the stage, somebody is standing, telling them with information, telling the people, the poor people that don't have information, the information that they need.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I think of. For me, that goes back to like one of the cores of facilitation, is that like everyone has agency to contribute to the information that's important, and that like you are the you're the person that, when you said like eases you ease that communication flow between everybody, as well as from you to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
What?
Go ahead, Sam. Sorry.
Difficulties do you find, Chad, when you facilitate in two? I would think of them as being pretty distinctly different settings. So in the more, what's probably, from what I'm getting from you, more typically a corporate setting of like helping an organization accomplish their goals, and then you said you also facilitate dialogues around identity and what sounded to me like power and oppression and privilege and things. So those are very different content areas, right? And I would guess that for you as the facilitator, you don't see those as being drastically different. So I'd just be curious if you could like talk a little bit about the different ways that you approach those two spaces, or maybe the ways that they're the same. But for people who haven't facilitated in both a more like corporate organizational effectiveness setting and then also in a more social justice setting, like how do those compare and contrast? Sure.
So to clarify, I'm right now full-time working for We, which is, so I'm not actually in that other social justice setting, but one of the reasons that I'm in this setting now is because of all the parallels that are drawn between them. And so let me start off with a story from when I was facilitating more of those social justice conversations for World in Conversation. So I was facilitating a dialogue, and on one side there were 4 civilians on the United States side, and then on the screen, on basically a Skype on steroids, video conference technology, there were 4 civilians in Afghanistan. And so for 90 minutes, they sat and all they did was talk. These people on the U.S. side had heard lots of things about people in Afghanistan from the news and the media, and they had an idea of who they were before they went into the conversation. Same with the Afghan side, is they had perceptions of who Americans were. And I would say that those 8 people all left that conversation with a much more sophisticated view of the humans that happen to live in that country, in that place. And so, do the U.S. side people understand Afghans? No. Do the Afghans understand Americans? No. But their way of interacting, the questions they're asking are much more informed. They're much more meaningful in some regards after. And so the same thing, replace that with 4 people on the executive team and 4 customer service reps on the frontline staff. Get them into a room, and you have them either, a lot of the stuff that I do is experiential based now, so it's not strictly dialogue, but there's always a debriefing or a dialogue component. So have an experience. So it might be like, use this weird contraption to lift the object from here to here. And it's hard, and it takes the group 20 minutes, and it's fun. And then afterward, have a conversation. Okay, cool. Forget about the object and forget about the actual task. What dynamics came up that felt relevant? So it looks like the CEO happened to have yelled over everybody the entire time, and not taken any answers from females. There were only male voices in the room. And so in a debrief, you can reflect that back and share that with people. So the parallel there is that, so 4 people in the U.S., 4 people in Afghanistan, leaving with a much more sophisticated understanding of who each other are. Replace those people with anybody with a role or a title or a box that they're put in. So you're a CEO, you're just a admin assistant, you're this. You have some box, and people already know you before they've met you. And so the facilitation part is smoothing the communication that actually allows 2 people to understand each other so that they can work better together in whatever capacity that is. So it might be just understand each other better, and we started facilitating dialogues with military cadets and civilians. And so it might be you just have a slightly different perspective than when you're deployed in that country and you have a gun and your finger's on the trigger. You might just think a little bit differently before you pull that trigger, because you talked with a person and you like made a very 2-dimensional idea of a person, very 3-dimensional. So does that cover how I see this corporate world overlapping with? It turns out that everybody's just a person. Like, there's a way, that original story that I told when I was going into the vice president of student affairs office in Penn State, I was all nervous. I was a sophomore in college, and I got there and I realized he's just a person. This is maybe inappropriate, but one of my mentors loves to share the most wonderful quote, which I think isn't just his quote, but this idea that even the Queen of England has diarrhea is true. Right? Like, everybody has that stuff that makes them totally not cool and fancy. And I think that those points, not that we facilitate dialogues about diarrhea in the boardroom, but there's a way that whatever that vulnerability is that requires people that talk about that is when the actual connection happens, and not the I ask questions because we're in a professional setting and it feels appropriate to talk to you while we're waiting for something to start. Is very different when you're naturally curious and you show up into a room and you see a colleague that you haven't seen in 2 weeks and you're so excited to ask them X or just to listen to them or whatever.
Yeah. It was interesting, too, when you were talking about, facilitating between the 2 groups and corporate and, an explicitly social justice kind of goal or setting, was the, presence of power dynamics and how those can often get in the way of us seeing humans as humans, right? That like sometimes your job is to like help break down power dynamics and how those keep us from communicating, and that, you know, in certain settings we can see the like social justice identities in those power dynamics, and sometimes it's like corporate versus admin. That was like what was coming up in your story when you were talking to me.
Yeah, there's those power dynamics, and it's interesting because like power dynamics, I would say, is true. So whatever dynamic is present in the room between an admin assistant and a CEO, when the admin assistant looks at their CEO, there's a way that they have perceptions of each other. I don't think it's necessarily the structure. So I'm not like, we're not going into facilitating like, break down your hierarchy and have a flat organization where nobody has any like specific responsibility. No, sometimes for most organizations, having like managers and like a system, a structure in place is super important. But being able to create a company culture where the admin assistant can walk into a manager's office and ask a question or voice a concern that he or she has is important. And sometimes all it is holding up a mirror for the organization. So like, I'm not doing a lot of teaching about what organizations should be, because that's teaching, not facilitating. I'm very much like, here's what I'm seeing. Is this what you see?
Right.
Is it different? Does it look like this, or does it look like this? And letting them just determine that for themselves. So that at the end of the day, whether you're participating or whether you're facilitating a social justice conversation or a company, there's a way that the participants have to do all the hard work. You can't, like, I can't change the perception of the CEO. I can create an experience that will invite people to take on a new lens and shift perspectives. But I can't make anybody do anything, which is one of the fundamental cores of, I think, all of our work, which is challenge by choice. So you have to pick your own poison. So sometimes there are people that come into a room and they already have a perception about what is going to happen, and they're like, yeah, I'm so not into this, and they're already checked out. And yet, oftentimes in the beginning, when I outline challenge by choice and share, like, yeah, some of you probably aren't all about this, and some of you are all about it, and that's where choice comes in. Not only am I not going to make you do anything, I can't make you do anything. So take a deep breath. We're all going to be okay for this period of time.
Yeah.
Oh, so many things going through my mind. The idea of power. Oh, I'm getting an echo. Is that somebody's sound?
Oh, it's gone now, I think.
Okay. That idea of power is something that's so you mentioned like that your goal isn't to deconstruct the power relationships in the organization. Like, you're not trying to change the structure or the shape of the organization. And the way that I heard what your goal is more to make sure that the power is being wielded in a way that benefits the goals of the organization as opposed to inhibits the goals of the organization. And I'm wondering, so the thing that I'd like to hear you reflect on is, how do you, in the space of the facilitation, get people, like, so in that training, the CEO doesn't necessarily have more power than the administrative assistant, right? Like, in the moving the ball from one thing to another, the CEO doesn't have any more power. The CEO might have institutional power from outside of the room, but in that room, the CEO doesn't necessarily have more power. And like, what strategies do you use in your discussion to make sure that that space is a space, like, even if it's just in your training, where everyone does feel like they can bring themselves to the table in an equitable way? Like, how do you, because that's a very rigid power structure outside of the room that you're going in and you're trying to create a more level playing field, even if it's just in that space. What do you do? How do you do that?
Yeah, so just so you can prepare, Meg, I'm going to flip this question back on you and ask you for context, what you do to create that safe space. The answer, again, is it depends. I'll just take the last example, though. So, so the last company that we worked with, at the beginning of the program started at 1 p.m. And went, or 12 p.m. and went to 6. And so sometime between 1 p.m. and 1:30, like in the first, maybe actually the first 15 minutes, we gave an outline. So we did some piece of connection before content, so we might have asked that question. What are you intending to achieve at work, and what about that is important? Got answers to that, but before maybe we even did that, what I would have said is, I don't know about for you, but it helps me to have a roadmap of where we're going. So all of you walked into this room because you had to, because work is called work for a reason. And so you actually had a very limited choice to come here. You could not show up, but that would maybe have consequences on, like, oh, I don't know, you having a job. And so setting that tone first is saying, so I acknowledge that some of you are here because you need to be here. And here's our hope and our sharing, just really openly sharing our intention for the space. So our intention is to create a space that's outside of work, that the language we use a lot is for you guys to work on the business and not for the business. So the brain gets really cloudy, thoughts get really cloudy when you have stress. You get this cortisol dump, and all of a sudden you're like not able to make really sound decisions. But when you're away from work and there's no crises to solve, there's no broken pipes to fix, there's no crashed buses or anything like that, you can think a little bit more clearly and be a little bit more deliberate with your words. So to frame this as like, we're working on the business, not for the business, sharing that intention, and also sometimes, depending on the group, being really deliberate about saying we want to create for the next 6 hours kind of Vegas rules. So what happens in this space stays in this space. And we hope that the learnings and what you learn from each other, about each other, leaves this room and actually carries on and starts more conversations that otherwise wouldn't have been started. And if somebody shares something that feels really vulnerable at some point in the program, can we all agree with either a thumbs up or a head nod to not go tell all the people that aren't here about that person while they're not even present? So just being really deliberate and actually having like a physical agreement of like a head nod or a thumbs up. And that depends on the group. That's not always, because sometimes we're not looking to go into that deep dive to talk about power and privilege and race and like identity. Sometimes we're talking about more dynamics that are underneath the surface, but not necessarily super contentious for people.
Yeah, but that still requires so much vulnerability. I mean, for someone to say, like with their boss in the room, for someone to say, I think a problem is my boss, like, that would be a very terrifying thing. And if that's the case, then that's your job, right? Is to create a space where they can point out that their boss might not be flawless, and their boss's inability to receive criticism or whatever, it might be inhibiting the organization from achieving their goals. Like, that's the part that I like. Have you seen that happen? And how have you, if so, like, how have you held that space where you're like, oh, that person's going to get fired tomorrow? Like, how do you do that?
Oh, bad laugh.
Rod, one of my mentors in this experiential, where I taught this team development facilitation class with at Penn State, he always used to say that one of his best, he feels like one of his best programs was this really intense deep dive with 6 people in a company, and at the end, one person quit their job.
Yes. All right. That's what I'm talking about. Okay.
They were that was a success because the group reached such a open, vulnerable place that the person, that people in the room finally were able to bring up, like, hey, you're not a good fit, and you don't think you're a good fit. It's not working for either of us, and have this conversation in a way that was like, cool, all right, I just lost my job, and like feeling good about that. But your question more was, how do you hold the space for the admin assistant to tell the CEO that the way he's managing sucks, or she sucks? And so for that, being really deliberate and sometimes re-emphasizing those like safe space rules in that moment, to be able to take a pause and sometimes say, like, if we're having a debrief where we saw some dynamics and we have a sense that there might be people that want to share that but aren't sure if they can, to reopen that space. And sometimes I physically draw a box in the center of the room and just say, like, clearing out this specific space for people to share stuff that they're pretty worried about sharing, and asking for everybody's support and agreement that because whatever you guys are thinking, like, it is there. Like, truth is truth. It just is there. whether you say it or not is what changes the dynamic. And so for this moment, for this box, for this framework, can we agree to have a dialogue about it and not not listen with judgment, but listen to understand rather than listening to be right?
I heard that recently articulated as predatory listening. The idea that you're listening where you're like, oh, I cannot wait to make you feel wrong, you know, like, and you're like listening with that intention. And I thought that's, you know, like, please let go of predatory listening and like listen, you know, authentically or with curiosity. So like go back to something earlier. I just thought that was such a great phrase.
Predatory listening. That's awesome.
I like that idea of the box too. A lot of people will use like cards or, you know, ways to be anonymous, but I like that idea of just creating essentially a soapbox, like our safety soapbox, where it's like if someone needs to be vulnerable, this is a place where you can do it. That's an interesting. I like that. That's good. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned images. That is, I don't have them super handy, but one of the decks of cards, the We Believe cards that we designed, have a quote on one side and an image on the other. And one of the reasons, Jen Stanchfield, who's a really cool experiential ed facilitator, has a kind of inserted this language into my brain. But there's a way that if you lay out a bunch of photos and ask people to pick a photo that represents fill in the blank. So it might, if it's right after some exercise, it might be pick a photo that like metaphorically represents something that you feel like you want to tell the group that you observed that feels relevant to share. And so that her language for it was shielded discussion. So there's a way when you put that medium in between people, it's like, I said it because of the picture, not because I actually, like, you know, it's like safer in some way. And so same thing with introductions. Pick an image that represents a core part of who you are. Try to do that in a group with no images. Just say like, all right, we're gonna go around the circle and just share your name and a core part of who you are. Like, whoa, that's like really heavy. But for some reason, you can ask the same question and have people choose a photo, and it pops for them.
That's great.
I love it. I love those experiential methods. I think that they're such an interesting kind of like backdoor almost, you know, like instead of being like, hey, just like walk on through this experience that feels reasonably predictable, you know, like you're getting at the learning in such a different way, but it's still the same kind of learning.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I promised I would flip the question back on you, Meg. I think we're probably running out of time, but we had 3 facilitators in a room. You knew you weren't going to get away with it. So, yeah, what do you and Sam do, Meg, to set a space where people can share anything?
So there's, if you go back and watch this, I laughed halfway through what you were saying. I like kept it quiet, but it was because it was almost identical, like to the word of like what me and Sam do. So like the Vegas rule, like that is number 3 on our ground rules sheet, like with that language. So a lot of really similar things. I love the idea of the box too. When you were saying that, I was like energetically just like, yes, that feels so safe. And yeah, so I think we use very, very similar language around like what's said here stays here, what's learned here leaves here. That's the like nugget sentence of exactly what you said, almost, you know, to the word. That's
a great nugget.
Yeah, not my nugget. That was somebody else's nugget that I borrow. But I would say that we try to explicitly acknowledge the discomfort involved in having these conversations. So for us, like, when I go into a social justice setting and everyone's like, this is going to be so fun, right? Like, while I'm on board with that, very few other people are. And I think in some ways it is our job as like social justice facilitators to acknowledge the difficulty and risk that's involved in the conversations that we're having, because it's not the like risk, there's like risk and there's danger, right? So like there can be risk for some people in saying something that they might, you know, might hurt somebody's feelings or might be biased and they don't know it. Like that can feel very emotionally risky. And then there can also be like real danger in if you name a dynamic that is present in your organization and people don't want to deal with it, like you feeling uncomfortable from that point on, or you being seen as like the whistleblower, like those things can have real consequences beyond just like the emotional kind of turmoil that might occur because you said something that triggered somebody else, or that brought somebody else, activated somebody else. So I think like some of our job is just explicitly acknowledging the vulnerability that's required to have these conversations, and then reframing that as courage is something that like I really like that language of saying like it is courageous to say I don't know, or it's courageous sometimes to ask a question, particularly when you don't know if that's like a biased question to begin with. So just acknowledging that struggle, I think, is a big part of what we do to encourage people to show up, kind of to really show up their full selves. And I think in terms of power dynamics, like how do we manage that? A lot of our settings, people are opting to be there. Not necessarily the social justice workshops, but a lot of the like train the trainer work that we do, people are opting to be there, which can change the dynamic a little bit, and it's cool in some ways when you get to see like administrative staff or classified staff and like med students and doctors, they're all coming in with the same level of knowledge, and so in some ways that like levels the playing field from the beginning, is that they're all opting to be there for the same reason. Yeah, Sam, was there anything you wanted to add to those things?
I would just say, in addition to what you were just saying, the big power dynamic we have to manage the most is the power dynamic between us as facilitators and the participants we have. Because like as Meg was just saying, the participants are often looking to us as experts or as know-it-alls or as like the holders of all knowledge, and we don't know nearly as much about their organization or their goals or all the things that you're talking about, Chad. Like we don't know those things, and without knowing those things, anything that we think we might know isn't nearly as relevant as it would be. So we see ourselves as being on very equal footing, so to speak, with the group, but the group in the beginning will often see us as having a disproportionate amount of power. So one of our goals in the beginning is to do everything we can to help them realize that if they see us up here and they see themselves down here, that that's not the case. They have a lot to bring to the space, and we do that through a few different ways. Right in the beginning, just getting people to recognize that they're experts in their organization, they're experts in their role in the organization, and we need that expertise in order to make our training work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh. Now or two, being too nice. Well, I know that we are coming up on or blasting past our time.
It's okay.
But as long as everybody's still good, we do have some like they're supposed to be rapid fire questions, so you can keep your answers as short and like nuggetable as you'd like. But if you are so inspired to continue to grow that nugget, you do that.
Nuggets.
I will take on the challenge of doing lightning rounds and actually just trying to share nuggets and not stories and long-winded things.
It's okay.
Hit me. Let's do it a couple times, and then, yeah, go for it.
All right. So if you could pick one ground rule to apply to the entire world that everyone would have to follow, what would that be?
See people as people, not objects.
Interesting. What is one topic or content area or learning point around which you'd like to facilitate more?
I do it a fair amount already, but asking powerful questions. More questions in the world. The world needs more questions.
And in that, do you mean teaching people how to ask powerful questions?
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Very cool. You can take this question any way you want. What is something that stresses you out as a facilitator?
The first 10 minutes of every group I will ever and have ever facilitated, because there's this moment of like, oh my gosh, is it going to work or is it not? and it's terrifying, and sometimes it's associated with awkwardness, and sometimes it's associated with resistance. And every single time after the beginning of the group's over, it washes away.
That's great. I love that you've just accepted it and it still stresses you out. That's a pretty great conversation. Like, this is going to be how it is, and it's going to suck, and that's okay. What's something that is core to your facilitation? So, like, your brand, not using brand in the typical term, but like, you know, the type of facilitation y'all do with We. What's something very specific to the facilitation you do that you think every other type of facilitator could benefit from?
Mm-hmm.
Does that question make sense?
Yep, totally.
Okay. Well, I just made up.
I'm trying to be deliberate with my answer.
Okay.
Knowing the content, already knowing your audience for sure, but knowing the content that you want to land with people at the end, and being very careful about designing experiences that at least open up the possibility that will come up. And so there's too much training that looks like one person talking at a group of people. And if I could snap my fingers and just disappear all of that, I'd be so happy.
Like
it. Is there a particularly unique place that you've ever done a facilitation, like a physical environment, or maybe, yeah, like a physical environment that you facilitated in that's unique?
I don't know if this counts. If we're going by the definition of facilitation to smooth the process of facilitation underwater, scuba diving, in ways that just like got people to do different things and messing with hand signals.
Yeah, that totally counts.
I facilitated a group of 30 blind students once, which was fascinating. Not going to go into that right now, but that was, the people were the very interesting part of that. The setting was whatever.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to do a part for that one.
Okay, I like it. I'm trying not to jump in. This is the part where Meg and I struggle. It's like, I want to ask follow-up questions, but we're doing lightning round. What's a piece of advice around facilitation you'd like to give yourself 5 years ago? If you could teleport back and tell 5 years ago Chad something about facilitation, what would it be?
Stop thinking you're so important.
Interesting.
You said lightning round. I'm giving you lightning answers.
So hard. It's so hard as a facilitator not to ask more questions. Okay. Is there a not directly facilitation related experience that you think all facilitators would benefit from having or experiencing or doing?
Getting married.
Oh, that's a really good one. Oh, you understand that question. What is a book that you recommend most to others? This is our second to last one, so if this has been tough for you, we appreciate you're doing a great job so far.
Okay, two of them. So that mentor that, where did I put that book?
You probably gave it to somebody.
Oh, here it is. The mentor that said even the Queen of England has diarrhea sometimes, wrote this book, The Best Advice So Far. So good. So many juicy nuggets. Like you don't have to read it through. Every chapter is this miraculously juicy nugget. So that one's really cool. Totally a plug there. And then Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. Super. If you want people to remember anything you ever do or say, you should read that book. And Anatomy of Peace is a really dynamite one.
Cool. We can put those in the description of the video. Thank you for those.
Awesome. Okay, last lightning round question before we wrap up and give you a chance to tell people how to check you out in more places than this interview. Do you have any favorite online resources or websites that you would recommend to others or check out on a regular basis yourself?
Yes. I have a good friend and colleague, Mark Collard, in Australia, and he runs a site called Playmeo.com. So play, MEO.com, and it's the largest online database of activities that have video tutorials for like how to facilitate the activities, and super cool, really awesome. Also very connecting to facilitating XYZ. His focus is a little bit more like experiential ed, camp focused to some degree, but the activities can definitely be adapted. And then, I mean, we send out a newsletter every month. That's pretty useful, I think. Those are the huge ones. And then, actually, I don't have it easily. I should have got all this stuff easily accessible, but I have a little, like, I call it my brain. That's like a little note card spiral, like almost a Rolodex kind of thing. I call it my brain because there are 500 activities that accomplish different things that I might pull out at a different time with a group. So if I see one dynamic, I just flip through that brain and then pick one. And so the advice would be create your own resource. When you learn things, write them down in one place and keep it that one place all the time so that you can access them, because in 3 years, you're not going to remember that cool thing that you remembered 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's
possible. So.
Cool. Okay, thank you. I'm thinking about how I could incorporate that myself. Well, Chad, this has been so much fun. We are in wrap-up mode. So you've mentioned your newsletter. Where can people find that? Where can people find y'all? Where can people find we online? Where can people find you specifically? Social media, websites, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so what we're not good at is being found. So if you Google we, you're not going to find us. So the best way I can do is just hold up this, I guess. Has our URL right on there. The URL is weand.me.
Cool.
Weand.me. So you can find us there, and if you Google, my name's Chad Littlefield, that will probably be more easily findable and direct you to we quicker than if you Google a two-letter word. Yeah.
Even with the exclamation point, can you yell at Google? Does that help, or does it not?
Yeah. So www.weand.me. And there's the newsletter sign up is right there, as well as some other fun resources like We Connect cards and some other cool tools. Where can we find you?
All over the place. Yeah, there's no shortage of finding Meg and I online.
Yeah, there's so many places. Soon you will be able to find this this clip in whatever form it ends up in on facilitating.xyz. That'll be on there soon. Otherwise, right now, the safezoneproject.com, guidetofacilitation.com. One day we will have a hub for all of these .coms. Yeah, that's not live. That one doesn't work. Yeah, so lots of places, but those are good starting places.
Cool. All right. Well, Chad, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciated this. This was fun. Good luck with everything, and thanks for staying with us.
Thanks. And I guess if you enjoy the conversation, then you have information to reach out to us. But I say that the two of us, in true facilitator style, debrief after this.
Absolutely. Without question.
All right. Cheers, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.